Tonight, we're honoring a multifaceted and multi-talented writer, director, and producer. His passion for storytelling led to the creation of the semi-autobiographical and beloved TV series Freaks and Geeks. This heartfelt, funny, and honest look at the lives of the misfit high school students in suburban Detroit not only became a cult classic, it earned him 2 Emmy nominations. He later went on to direct episodes of some of the most acclaimed TV series, including Arrested Development, The Office, 30 Rock, Mad Men, and Parks and Recreation. But rather than being confined to television, he took bold risks and branched out into film. One of those risks was a little movie called Bridesmaids, which went on to gross over $300 million worldwide. But beyond his groundbreaking contributions to entertainment, he's a true Renaissance man. He launched his own brand of London dry gin, Ardingstalls, and is known for his daily wardrobe of Savile Row suits. He also has published 5 books showcasing his creativity and unique voice, which has made a lasting impact both on and off the set. With his company headquartered in Burbank, where he also resides, he's not only a remarkable talent, but a truly special honoree for the Burbank International Film Festival. And now, without further ado, please welcome Burbank's very own Mr. Paul Feig.
All right. Give it up for Paul Feig, right? Paul, you came dressed to impress tonight. I love it. My name's Nick Schultz, and I have the distinction of serving as the mayor for the great city of Burbank, California. Thank you all for being here tonight. And before I go on, I do want to acknowledge we have our elected city clerk, Kimberly Clark, here in the room. And the love of my life, Allie, the First Lady of Burbank. Allie, thanks for being here. The City of Burbank's motto is we're a city built by people, pride, and progress. And it takes pride in our exemplary residents, just like you, Paul. His remarkable career has not only brought joy and laughter to audiences, but has also set a new standard for comedy and storytelling. But you already know that. That's why you're here tonight to celebrate. Paul creates jobs, supports local businesses like my favorite, the Smokehouse Restaurant, best restaurant in town. And he even stages photo shoots at his Burbank backyard pool. By the way, I'm getting an invite to the next one, right? Okay. Some of which you're going to see tonight. His involvement and presence enriches our community and highlights the vibrant culture of our city. Now, I'm going to pause right here and just say the role of mayor in Burbank is largely a ceremonial one, but every once in a while, I get to do something that I really enjoy. I have the ability, in the way that only a mayor does, to issue official proclamations, which are the most official honorary statement that a city can bestow. And therefore, right now, I, by the authority vested in me as the mayor of Burbank, I'm proud to present you, Paul, right behind me, with this framed official City of Burbank proclamation recognizing you as an exemplary resident and a proud Burbankian. Give it up for Paul.
Wow. Oh, I did not expect this. This is so cool. Wow. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming. My God, this is so cool. It's really exciting to have my COVID mustache immortalized forever. I feel such a deep attachment to Burbank. I'm from Michigan originally. And yes, hey, there we go. Don't break it. And when I first moved out here, I was 17 years old to become a tour guide at Universal Studios, and arrived And I'd always heard about Burbank from Laugh In and from the Johnny Carson show where they say beautiful downtown Burbank. And I knew, this is the home of showbiz. Arrived in California on the freeway, saw Randy's Donuts, that giant donut, and said, that must be Hollywood. And checked into a motel right next to that in Inglewood, where I lived for 2 terrible weeks. I became a tour guide, and I was living with another tour guide who lived in North Hollywood. So I was living there, went to USC, lived downtown at USC, and was really having a hard time with Los Angeles. I just, being a kid from the Midwest, it just wasn't my kind of jam, and it just felt too big and crazy and all that. Until I discovered Burbank. And I moved into Burbank, almost 40 years ago, 30, 40 years ago, and felt like the first time I came in here, it's like I found my home. I found the place that makes me as happy as the Midwest does, but it's still the entertainment capital of the world, and I'm right next to Hollywood, and I'm right next to all these studios, and I just couldn't believe it. And there's not a day that goes past that I just don't feel so happy being in Burbank. So thank you, Burbank, for this, and Mayor, it's truly an honor. So thank you for that, and I think you're going to have to hear me talk for about an hour, so I'll cut my speech short here. But thanks, everybody, and more fun to come. Thank you.
As with our tradition, we'll be doing a 60-minute career retrospective interview with our guest of honor for a live taping of the Hollywood Reporter's Awards Chatter podcast, followed by a brief intermission. Here for that conversation is one of the best journalists in the business. Please welcome the Hollywood Reporter's executive editor of awards, my friend, Mr. Scott Feinberg.
Well, thank you all very much for being here, and thank you, Paul. I'm just setting our timer, so I respect everyone's time here, but I am so excited to have this opportunity to do something that we started last year when Tim Burton was this festival's honoree, and really not just honor some great member of the film community, entertainment community from Burbank, but kind of understand their path through the business and life. And so let's go back to the very beginning, if we can, Paul. You referenced this a moment ago, but just where specifically were you born and raised, and what did your folks do for a living?
I was born and raised in Mount Clemens, Michigan, which is also known as Clinton Township, where if you're running for president, you have to stop there and make a speech. My father was a retailer. He had an Army surplus store, sporting goods, but mostly Army surplus. And my mom basically worked in my dad's store. Yeah.
And they were, I read, they were not old, but older parents. When you came along, you were the one child. And was that, it seems that may have in some ways influenced a number of different interests of yours, including the fact that you're a very dapper guy who's been dressing well since you were a kid, that, your interests in, I feel like you walked out of the Thin Man movies of the 30s.
I'll take it.
And the booze and everything. It's really, so just talk about, if you can, how that may have had some ricochet effects.
Yeah, well, my parents were both 40 when they had me, so for back then, I barely made it out. Here I am. And my parents just had old-fashioned ways about them. My mom loved old movies, and so we would watch on the afternoon movie hosted by Bill Kennedy, who was the voice of Superman, the faster than a speeding bullet. He had a show in Detroit, and to me, that was like, he was a big movie star, and I couldn't believe it. I got to go to his studio once and see where he did it, and that was so exciting. But so I got to know all those old black and white Cary Grant and Fred Astaire movies with my mom. And my mom had a really goofy sense of humor. She loved silly, silly, silly stuff. And my father hated silly stuff. He was a raconteur. He loved jokes.
Right.
Joke telling, like, Henny Youngman, but he liked long jokes. And he could tell a joke like nobody. Because there's nothing worse than somebody go, I got a joke, and you're like, oh God, we're here for 5 minutes. But he could just hold a table kind of spellbound and then get a giant laugh at the end. A skill I do not possess, by the way. But I think it was that weird fusing of my mom's silly sense of humor and my dad's kind of more refined, if you would call it that, sense of humor. Although this is how refined my father's sense of humor was. I was a magician growing up and entered the high school talent show in 9th grade and put together my magic act. And so my dad goes, "Let me see it." So I did it, and he goes like, "Oh, you got to have jokes in there. You got to have jokes." So he pulls out this old notebook of jokes that he would go to the nightclubs when he was, younger in the 40s and the 50s and write down the jokes. So he gives me all these jokes that are pretty off color. And I do them for my act. The very first joke is a real puzzler about, I don't want to even tell the joke. It was basically, the punchline was something like an elephant is up on a hill silhouetted and you think an elephant's shoving cabbage up its ass. I mean, it was literally... So I tell this joke, and I hit the punchline, and it's dead silent for about 5 seconds, and all of a sudden you hear all these teachers in the back go, "Rah!" start laughing. And I end up winning the talent show with all these old dirty jokes, basically, and lame magic tricks. So there you go.
That is great. Now, high school, we know your experiences, we have a sense of them because they were largely an inspiration for Freaks and Geeks, which we'll come to. But I wonder if you can just take us into some of the more specific elements of your high school experience, because it wasn't just being a kid going through classes. You were from, I think, 15. You took, I guess, that talent show experience and were now performing in front of other, maybe somewhat unconventional audiences. How did you become? What were you doing during high school outside of school?
Well, I was really into stand-up comedy because there was a show back then. I don't know, some of the older folks in the audience, like myself, will remember. It was called Make Me Laugh. And it was a show hosted by Bobby Van, I think. Marla, am I right about that? It was, and they had these comedians like Bruce I forget. But they would basically show was a person would come out, and these 3 comedians had a minute to try to make the person laugh. And if they laughed, they won money or whatever. But that really started the stand-up the comedy club scene, because there weren't a lot of comedy clubs, dedicated comedy clubs, and suddenly there were. So there's these open mic nights. And at 15, Steve Martin was my hero, and George Carlin and Lenny Bruce, and I wanted to do that. So I put together an act, and there was a place called the Delta Lady, which was a biker bar down at 8 Mile and Gratiot in Detroit. And if you know the movie 8 Mile, that's what it's about. And so it was a really rough place, and they had a comedy night where, incidentally, like Tim Allen first started performing, and a guy named Mike Binder, who was a very famous comedian at the time. And so I got my parents to take me there, and I would do my act. And I got laughed at. I mean, I got big laughs, but they were all laughing at me because I was 15 years old and telling really stupid jokes and all that. But that was my goal, was to do that. And so, yeah, between that and then drama club and forensics. Was anyone here in forensics? Anybody know what forensics is? It's not autopsies, I swear. It's not. It's like an oral interp that you get up and do these presenting, you do different voices and stuff. And I loved it. And
you said you had I think a high school teacher who was sort of, you likened her to Robin Williams in Dead Poets Society. What was that again, something that may have shaped what you did after? What was that about? Yeah,
Stephanie Conrad. She, my freshman year, we had the choir teacher was the drama teacher, and so that year we did a play, and it was ridiculous. It just looked like a kid's play. The next year, this woman comes in, Stephanie Conrad, this big, like, blonde, brassy woman, and she was like a drill sergeant and just taught us about drama and was really hard on us. And she just taught me everything I ever kind of learned about acting and taking it seriously and how to create a mood and how to find an internal life and all that. And I really just credit her with everything.
So you are, among many other things, known for really kind of changing the game in movies in terms of centering women in comedies. That people forget, because it's not been that long, but I think it's already, the effect has been marked, that there's pre and post Bridesmaids in terms of really building comedies around actresses. And I want that actually goes back way before you were doing anything professionally. Can you explain why, really for all your life, you've kind of gravitated more towards women?
Well, I think I was an only child, so I was really close with my mom. I grew up next to a family of 8 kids. 6 of them were girls. And I was really close with them. And then in school, in drama club, it was mostly girls. And then or else my super nerdy friends like me, and the other dudes, so, and we were just trying to escape basically the toxic masculinity that exists in school, especially when you get into junior high and high school, of bullies. I had a lot of bullies and all that. And so my safest place was hanging with all the girls or my fellow nerds. And because of that, I didn't care about stories about guys particularly. Everybody was into comic books. To me, comic books were just like a bunch of guys that would beat me up. That's all superheroes look like to me. And so I just really got into comedy, and then all the girls and women I knew were really funny, and how they made each other laugh and how we could make each other laugh. And so that I just related to that more. But then I'd go and see movies, comedy movies especially, and the men were sort of the ones dominating, and the women were just sort of props, or they were, they get their shirt pulled off, or they, whatever, And I was just like, I don't like this dynamic. And then when I got to Hollywood and started befriending, women in the business, especially comedic actresses and comedians, and I would see them in movies, and they were so funny in real life, and then they were not funny in the movies because they weren't allowed to be funny, and it just all added up to going like, I don't like this. And then you take meetings, and I would be pitching female-led comedies or just stories, and they would always go, oh, you can't do that, because, and I go, and you didn't know enough about the business you don't want to sound like an idiot, like, I guess that there's a rule that you can't make things about women, and they'd go, because internationally it doesn't sell, and blah, 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 blah. But after hearing that for a while, you go like, well, why are we accepting that? Like, women are more than half the population of the world. Why do they not have their own movies? Why can they not be in them? But it took, here, see? But it really took Bridesmaids to crack that, I mean, it was just, the pressure on that movie, you can't believe. I mean, the movie did not cost that much, really.
Well, I'm going to pause this because we're going to go deep into that. But I first want to talk about, you mentioned coming out to LA as just initially, I think, for only the summer. That was the plan, right?
Yeah.
To be a tour guide at Universal. What was the impetus there? Was the idea that I want to just find a way to be out there? I want to be out there doing X, Y, Z. Like, how did you end up? Because I know there was a year of college back in Michigan, but you pretty soon ended up out here for good. So how did you end up here?
Well, I wanted to be an actor. That was my goal. I wanted to be a famous actor and comedian and all that. And so I was like, I can't do this in Detroit. It's not going to happen in Detroit. Because my father would be like, you can work here. There's a company called Jam Handy, and they do industrial movies. You can do those. It's like, I don't want to do those. Yeah. I want to do Hollywood movies. And so found out about Universal Studios, and they were auditioning for tour guides. So I got my next door neighbor. I said, okay, I've got my finals are today. We're going to jump in the car because these auditions are in a day and a half. And we drove straight through to here. And I had my meeting at Universal and got the job. And so, but to me, that was everything, because I had taken the tour when I was a kid, and just being on the back lot. Remember, they had the props from the Incredible Shrinking Man. Mm-hmm. And it just blew my mind, because I got excited about seeing Bill Kennedy's studio back in Detroit, where you sat and talked about movies. So this was props and studios and all that. So I thought, if I could be a tour guide, then I'm sure I'll get discovered. Right. Which, you don't. You definitely don't.
Spoiler alert. Yeah.
It's hilarious how many people would take the tour back then and think they were going to get discovered too. Because some people would show up just dressed all the nines. I'm like, this ain't going to happen, man. Sid Sheinberg's not coming down. I've been trying all summer. It's not happening. But it did teach me how to be comfortable in front of an audience, because I was trying to be a stand-up, but I was very kind of like a DJ or something. And I would do the tour and be like, hey, everybody, look on the right side of the thing and you'll see all this. And I remember like halfway through the summer, one of the drivers who knew me, he goes like, why do you talk like that? And I was like, well, because I'm a tour guide, right? He goes, just be yourself. And it was that summer, I just kind of got comfortable in front of the mic, and then it started being easier, and then I would go and do open mic night at the Comedy Store, and just realized I had to be here.
So just because this is going to be one of the dots that's going to connect to a lot of other things, you're in your mid-20s out in LA area, living, I believe, at a place with a bunch of other stand-ups, or with a few other stand-ups. Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah.
And a guy who's a few years younger, I guess 18, shows up on the scene. Who was that? And what were your first impressions of this person?
It was Judd Apatow. He was 17 years old. I was probably 21 or 22 at that point, I think. And he was this kid, but he was a showbiz kid. He had come from, his father was a famous music lawyer and his mother was in the business. And so he showed up. We were all from the Midwest. All my friends were from Iowa and Minnesota and all that. We were all struggling to be stand-ups. And he was booking a comedy night at a comedy club, and he was helping to run Comic Relief. And it's like, who are you? And all the other guys would make fun of him. And I remember going to those guys and go, like, you guys better be nice to this guy. He is going to run the town someday. I'm telling you, this guy's just too smart. And we just had a very similar sense of humor. Yeah. And so we always kind of bonded from there. And we just stayed friends forever. And then he put me in some movies.
And meanwhile, though, so I guess parallel to doing stand-up in the area, you're also increasingly getting acting roles, maybe not on shows that were super high profile all the time or lasted very long, but you were getting work as an actor. Maybe I was thrilled to kind of discover and put the pieces together. You were Mr. Poole, the biology teacher on Sabrina the Teenage Witch.
Yes, I was. Yes,
you were among other illustrious parts. Yes,
yes, exactly.
But all the while, it seems like there was a piece of you that was interested in being behind the camera as well, because it was, in fact, after I think you started on Sabrina that the seeds of your filmmaking debut began to grow, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, my goal was always to be writer, director, performer. I wanted to, like Albert Brooks, Woody Allen was doing. That, to me, was like, that's the goal. And so I was working towards that. And and I was a regular in like 5 different TV series that all went like one season and got canceled. But whenever I was on a show, I would write an episode on spec and give it to the writers. And I hung out with the writers more than the actors just because I wanted to know what they were doing and would try to hang with the director when they would let me. And just kind of always wanted to keep like working and being creative in that way. I just hit a point as an actor where for a while, you're just sitting waiting for the phone to ring. And it was just so powerless. That's why I was trying to do stand-up. But then just realized you had to create. You can't just sit there. That's why when I lecture to film students and everything now, it's like, you guys, you have what we never had, which we didn't have the internet. We didn't have, great cameras on our phones that we could shoot stuff with. So you had to create stuff. And for me, it was stand-up and then writing. And I would just kind of and they would always love the script and go, oh, we'll do this next season, and then we get canceled. So
well, and with Sabrina, that was sort of the I think you talked about how basically there's a way that the worst year of your life becomes the best year of your life, and this was I guess you spend a lot of your savings after the first season you're on Sabrina to make a film, and you got Penn Jillette. This is a $30,000 for a guy who's, that's got to have been a lot of money at the time, right?
Yeah, it was all the money we had. It was all the money I saved. Fortunately, we didn't have kids. It was just my wife and I and a dog. That was my plan. Like, okay, I'm finally on a hit show. I banked $30,000. I'm going to write a movie that I'm going to shoot, write, direct, star in, and I wrote this movie called Life Sold Separately. And basically, like, what's the cheapest movie I can make? Okay, it's 4 people show up in a field in the middle of a day. One day, they're waiting for your UFO to show up, and then it's their interactions and stuff. So no lights, no costume changes, completely easy. So I did it, but still back then it actually ended up costing $35,000, wow. All because of film and developing. Which, again, that's why when I talk to film students, I could have shot that movie for nothing on my phone. Right. It would look 10 times better.
But you thought you were flush. You're on Sabrina the Teenage Witch.
I was rocking it. I'm like, I'm living my dream. I'm doing this stuff. I'm in post-production in my office, cutting this movie, and I got a call from the producer of the show. Oh, hey, we got some good news and bad news. Well, what's the bad news? Well, we're writing you out of the show. What? Well, what possibly could be the good news? Well, we would like to have you on for like one guest spot. And it's like, oh, great. So I told my wife, like, okay, we're bankrupt. And I didn't know. I had this movie. I'd finished it. I was kind of happy with it at the time. But I couldn't get it at any film festivals. That year, everybody was doing independent films, and that was the year that like Sundance had like 1,400 independent films submitted to them. So I had no chance with a movie about 4 people in a field getting in anything. And so I had this year of trying to hawk this movie, writing scripts in an office in Burbank that I rented right at the corner of San Fernando and 3rd, I think, and above the Hawaiian barbecue place. Yeah, you know the place. It used to be a great burrito place there, by the way. And just had this terrible year of going like, I think I've got to get out of the business. I think I've just got to go get a regular job and give up the dream. And I finally got into this traveling film festival with my movie called Flix Tour, where they would fly you into a different part of the country, rent you a car, and you would show your movie at different colleges. When I was going out, I was sitting at Nippon, which is now Kubosu, in Toluca Lake, fair enough, with my wife. And I had this idea to do a show about when I was in high school, because I just hated high school shows and movies because they were about people I didn't know and all these problems that I didn't deal with. And I was like, I want to write this thing on spec, and I want to call it Freaks and Geeks because it's going to be about my nerdy friends and the burnouts we hung out with. And she just put her hand up. She goes, give me a high five. And I did. And she goes, like, that's the idea that's going to make you.
That's amazing. Yeah. And then, yeah, I mean.
And shout out to my wife, who's not here because she had to be in London. So she's very sad not to be here. But Lori, I love you.
Now it's so valuable for people, I think, to hear that, because when you can be at your lowest point, if the juices are still flowing, I mean, that began, a painful up and down period, but I mean, that was the start of a lot of stuff. And I correct me if I'm wrong, just in terms of how that goes from being the spec script to being on the air. Judd, who we had talked about earlier, right, had been on the writing for the Larry Sanders Show. That ends. He now gets a development deal at DreamWorks and needs material. Yeah, well, he came to the screening of my movie, and he was like, yeah, that's really great. He said, I have this TV deal. If you have an idea for a TV show, let me know. But I was like, I don't want to burn that off. It's like so easy, because I have that now where people go, oh, here, and they kind of unload the drawers. Like, no, don't give me something. Like, give me something you really are passionate about, and you think is great. So I was like, okay, I'm going to hang on to this check from him. And after I wrote this thing, I was actually going to submit it to a friend of mine who had a deal somewhere else. And Lori, my wife, read it, and she's like, you got to give this to Judd immediately. She said, this is you guys. This is the two of you. And so I sent it to him. Got on a plane and flew into Kansas to continue this tour. 12 hours later, got a phone call. I had to go to a payphone because I had a pager back then. And it was Judd saying, like, we're going to buy this. We're going to set this up at DreamWorks. And it was just this thing of like, oh my gosh, I think my life's about to change. And I knew so little back then that you kind of go, I have a TV show, not knowing it could fall apart at any moment. But I think that's why that show worked is I didn't know enough to expect bad things to happen, So you just this is going to be great. Everybody's going to love this. And you just had this spirit of like, let's just tell the most heartfelt stories we can and the cringy stories, and let's make people uncomfortable. Let's tell it like it was. And that's ultimately what killed the show. Yeah, because these are basically, I guess I'm trying to remember the phrase, but I think, basically the idea for broadcast television in particular has long been, least objectionable content, appeal to the widest number of people. So if you start, just inherently focusing on freaks and geeks and their problems, and I mean, you could see how the resistance started. But just in case there's anyone under a rock who, or maybe younger than others, who doesn't remember the year that this was on, 1999 to 2000 on NBC, single camera, hour-long show about high school in the early 80s generally, but specifically the Weir family. Now, the New York Times at the time wrote that it, quote, manages to be brutally honest, unexpectedly hilarious, and often touching all at once, and then another time called it brilliantly funny and poignant. People were loving it, in part, certainly the writing and the idea. Then you guys also discover a whole generation of actors and actresses who are still at the center of the scene. I'm just going to quickly list off: Linda Cardellini, James Franco, Busy Phillips, Seth Rogen, Jason Segel, Martin Starr. We can go on and on and on. How did, just for a quick second, and well, I should also mention John Francis Daley, who was basically playing this guy Sam, who was you, right?
Like me, yeah.
Why were you guys so successful at finding such talented actors.
Well, we threw the door open wide, and NBC allowed us to throw the door open wide. It's funny, when I went in for our first meeting where we were going to kind of meet with the NBC, I remember saying to Judd, if they're not going to let us cast this the way we want to, and they're going to make us cast a bunch of models, I'm not doing it. And so I got in there, I'm about to start to make the speech. We got to cast this the way we want it. They go, oh, we agree. And it's like, okay, great. So I won my first fight. Right. But it really is, well, first of all, we had Allison Jones, the amazing Allison Jones, who is the mother of modern comedy, is Allison Jones, also Marla Garland sitting right here. And basically, we just saw everybody. And, you know, what happens in casting a lot of times is you have an image of somebody in your head. And this was, especially with this, because a lot of these characters were based on people I knew. And so you kind of had in your head, oh, I want to look like this. But people would come in and they'd be so good. And it was Judd at one point, like somebody, I think it was, I forget who it was, Jason Segel, or it was Seth Rogen, I think, when he came in. Somebody came in, I forget which one. And I was like, oh, they're so good, but they don't look like the person I thought of. And he goes like, change the character. Yeah. You know, and that was the big lesson I learned of, like, if somebody's awesome, don't send them away. You're not Shakespeare. You can make it better, make it for them. Right. And so that's kind of how it was. But we saw so many people, and there's just, Judd's joke was always, everybody who leaves one of your auditions thinks they have the role. Right. Because I was an actor, and any actors here know how brutal the audition process is. And, you know, how many auditions that I have of people just staring at me and, you know, kind of like, you know, one famous actor, once I was auditioning for a show that he produced, and he's behind his desk with these other people, and he's reading a magazine. I walk in, he looks up, and he goes back to reading the magazine. And I'm doing my audition while he's reading a magazine. You're just like, I guess I'm not getting this? So I was so intense on my, like, wanting to make sure everybody felt seen and didn't walk out feeling like they didn't get it. But in that way, you were always so open to everybody. So you'd have all these lists, you know, like, oh, this person's good. And then somebody would come in and just blow you away. And they blow everybody else out of the water. You know, Linda Cardellini, Franco, you know, Martin Starr. I mean, so that's why I say, if you just allow yourself to feel a natural talent and really be honest with yourself. But then we hit the jackpot too, because they were all so smart. You know, I mean, Seth Rogen, we found in Vancouver, we did this open casting call. I mean, like 1,000 people showed up. I'm like, we're gonna read everybody. And after like 10 people, you're like, okay, I'm gonna kill myself. Like, how do we get out of this? But there was like 3 people they had there who had like agents, and Seth was one of them. So he came in and read, and Judd and I were just like, oh my God, he's hilarious. And I remember afterwards he goes, when we hired him, he goes, yeah, you know, my acting coach up there said I have to change my voice or I'll never work. I was just like, what terrible advice from an acting coach. So it was just, you know, again, finding these natural personalities.
And, you know, the people who were watching the show were loving it, including, you know, people of all ages who could relate, but also, again, just, you know, critics were, here's what they were saying at the time. Time magazine in 1999 says, this is the second best show of the year, only behind a little show called The Sopranos. You know, but you guys are put in a pretty horrendous position because first they start you on Saturday nights at 8 p.m., which is not ideal. No. And then they move you to Monday nights opposite Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, which, if you remember, it was a pretty big thing at the time.
That was the juggernaut.
Then the World Series comes along and you're totally shunted aside for a while. I mean, it was like you were being set up to fail. And so I think that you guys were averaging 6.7 million.
Well, our average was 7 million. And I had to laugh because just the other day, Matlock, big hit, 7 million people. I was like, oh, man.
The times have changed.
The business has changed.
Right. Well, so in the end, only 12 episodes ever aired. Yeah. There were 6 others. How did you learn that it was ending, and were you surprised?
I mean, we felt that the writing was on the wall, but at the same time, there's a sad story. My mother died, and then we got canceled the next day. That was awesome. So I remember just being like with my father and the lawyer, and like Judd calls me up in tears. He's like, we got canceled. I was like, I can't deal with anything else. Like, it was just too much. But there was also, I mean, we worked so hard on that show. Not that everybody doesn't work hard on their shows, but I was so exhausted. I had a moment of like, oh, thank God. And then the grief hits you of like, oh my God. Because not only losing my mother was something, like losing your show meant you basically, it kills these characters. And I had so many plans for them and all these things I wanted them to do and long-term stories and stuff. And then you're like, they're gone. And this was 2000, which there was no aftermarket for 18 episodes of a show.
You guys spent years putting together the DVD box set just so people could still, there was a lot of demand for that.
Yeah, it was 4 years of just, it was gone, and we had a few places that wanted to put it out on like videotape, but they didn't want to pay for the music rights. So they said, we just have to take all the music out and put in generic music. I was like, I'd rather have nobody see it.
Right.
Because I wrote to those songs, Oh, thanks.
Yeah. Well,
and shout out to Shout Factory, who are the ones that ponied up the dough, ponied up $1 million and did it. And I think they've made $1 gazillion off of it.
Well, again, I think a lesson here for filmmakers in the room is just the ups and downs. 1 minute you've got a show on NBC that's going out to the whole world. The next minute, you were there. People, I think the way you learned it wasn't going to continue was bad. Then at that same time is when I think Judd had Superbad and things were starting to go for him a little bit, but people are forgetting in some cases that you were actually the guy that created Freaks and Geeks. I know there was just this weird purgatory that you were in for a few years, and what kind of happened is I think you began to be embraced, right, as a guy who could come in and be a sharpshooter of a director on other people's shows. And so I wonder if I can prompt you about a few of these, because I don't know if I didn't fully appreciate until I really started doing my homework for this, and I don't think a lot of people are going to realize how many of the shows we love, and even the episodes within those shows that we love, trace back to you. So can we start with Arrested Development, where you directed 7 episodes of that. And again, it's not like coincidental. It traces back to people in the business who loved Freaks and Geeks, right?
Well, yeah, it was Victor Shue was one of our producers on Freaks and Geeks, and he went off to do Arrested Development, and had pitched me to them, and they were fans of Freaks and Geeks. And so I had the cred to be able to come in and do it, and I loved it. I mean, it was so much fun, and it was, I liked because I do a lot of loose comedy now, but back then we were very scripted on Freaks and Geeks, and what I liked about Arrested Development is they were really heavily scripted, but they had these really funny actors who were good at improv too. So I started to get to play around in that way. Not that Mitch Hurwitz would use it. These actors do all this stuff, but Mitch was very much about his scripts, but at least we got to play on the sets and feel it out that way. And the great thing about that show also as me as a director was they were turning in scripts really late. I mean, I would have days where they go, where's the script the night before? They go, you'll get it on the set in the morning. So, okay, which I don't think the Guild lets you do anymore. But it was kind of the greatest film school for me because I used to be so shot listing and preparing and storyboarding, and you just go like, I gotta be there. And what happened is if you're in the moment, you find you're open to all the stuff people want to do, and you're seeing the location as you get it and go, oh, it'd be funnier if we did this. And it just loosened me up. So I think I learned so much doing that show.
And you had not really directed episodic television until the very end of Freaks and Geeks, right?
Yeah, well, I wanted to direct the pilot for Freaks and Geeks, and they wouldn't let me anywhere near the director's chair. It was really only because the show, everybody knew the writing was on the wall, it was going to get canceled. They go, sure, go ahead and write and direct the last episode. Nobody cares. So, yeah, but I was really proud of it. And that actually, I think that script got nominated for an Emmy.
There you go.
Yeah, it did.
And in some ways showed
I didn't win though.
Arrested Development that you could do it, right?
Yeah.
So then, all right, now we come to 14 episodes of another mockumentary style show called The Office.
Yes.
This was 2005. The American version goes on the air. The first season, people may not remember, was not a hit out of the gate in the way that it became. You get recruited for season 2. I know eventually you're an executive producer, which I think, as it was explained, the dynamic on that particular show was that Greg Daniels was the storylines, but that you were like the go-to director. And in this case, that started in the third episode of the second season, which ended up being a real turning point for people giving a damn about this character Steve Carell was playing. Can you just break down, because again, if you like The Office, it's probably because of something that happened basically starting with this episode.
Yeah, it was, the first season was only 6 episodes. It was like a summer replacement thing. And they stuck very close to the formula of the UK version, which was Michael Scott, which, was played by Ricky Gervais. That character was really mean. He was really an asshole. Yeah. And they really stuck to that, but it just, people weren't into it. American audiences don't like irredeemable lead characters. They hate it. And so what happened was that summer, 40-Year-Old Virgin had come out, and Steve Carell kind of went through the roof with that. And so NBC, and all hats off to Kevin Riley for sticking with the show. It was like, how do we have this big guy and nobody likes him on the show? And so the first few episodes, he was still kind of in that mode. And then the first episode I did was called Office Olympics, and is where Michael Scott goes and he's going to buy this condo. And he's freaking out about it and all this stuff. And it's really funny. And they're playing these games back in the office and all that. And so they're going to have this medal award ceremony, and then we're going to hand out medals. Michael Scott comes back. He's had this terrible day, and the whole gag was supposed to be they're going to give him a medal and just kind of laugh at him, and he's going to be all like proud, like, oh, I finally had something good happen. Well, so Steve gets up on stage, and as soon as they start playing the music, he starts to cry. Like, this tear comes down, his eyes get really red, and he's really emotional. And we were just all like, oh, that's it. And I remember running up to Steve and go like, do that again, keep doing that. I'm actually getting chills right now when I'm telling it. And it just like, you go like, that's the key. He can't be an asshole. He has to be a guy who, if he is an asshole, he doesn't know it. He thinks he's funny, he thinks he's really supportive and all this, and then he can be a bore, but he's well-meaning. And that's when the whole show kind of changed.
Totally. And then 3 episodes of Weeds, an episode each of 30 Rock, Parks and Rec, Mad Men. We could go on and on, but I don't know anybody who can kind of put a resume against that in the last 20, this century. So that's pretty amazing.
Thank you.
So meanwhile, in terms of feature films, you made 2, you directed 2. There was I Am David in 2003, Unaccompanied Minors in 2006. Not triumphs. not to comment on the quality. It's just
they were craters, is what they were, Scott. Exactly. They literally cratered my career.
So you've said you were, the way you looked at it, you're in director's jail for at least features.
Yeah.
And then something comes along in 2007 where you're asked to go to a table read. Mm-hmm. Can you explain how this came about, what it was?
Yeah, I was in post-production on Unaccompanied Minors, and Judd called me up. He said, look, I know you like to work with female characters and the female storylines. We're doing a reading of this, of Kristen's script. Kristen Wiig had just done a little part in Unaccompanied Minors, like her first movie role. And so he's like, Kristen and Annie wrote this script. So I go to this table read, and it's Bridesmaids. It wasn't called Bridesmaids at the time. It was, I think it was called Honored or something like that. And so there's this whole table of these really funny women up there, not the ones who were in the movie, although ironically, Melissa McCarthy was one of the people reading.
Wow.
But not reading the Megan role or anything, just reading kind of utility players. And, and the script needed a lot of work, but at the same time, I was like, oh my gosh, this would be so much fun. Like what a chance to showcase all these funny women. And so afterwards, we gave a lot of notes and stuff and all our thoughts and all that. And then Judd was like, could you shepherd this? I was like, I'd like to, but I'm on this other movie, and they want me to go right into another one at Warner Brothers because the movie hadn't bombed yet. And so I was like, so I don't have time, but just keep me up to date. I feel like I gave really good notes. Yeah. Let them do let's stay involved. Yeah. And then my movie bombed, and then that one fell apart, and then I would call like Judd, like, what's up with that? And he goes, I don't know, Kristen's really busy. And it's just like 3 years of kind of like, what's going on? I would check in all the time, and then one point, about 2 years in, he goes like, I think it's dead. So I was like, oh shoot, that's really sad. And then out of the blue, I'm in New York, working on a series of internet ads for Macy's.
Starring?
Yes, exactly. with famous people about them going into something and doing a makeover with their product. So it was like Martha Stewart goes into a frat house and she remakes it, and Tommy Hilfiger goes to a weird family reunion, does it. And another one was starring about a guy who goes into a kid's bake sale and teaches one little kid how to be a businessman. And that man was Donald Trump. So there I am in New York, living the dream, directing Donald Trump. And I just got back to the hotel and I was just like, what am I doing? What am I doing? Like, I want to make movies. Like, I'm so lucky. I'm working on some of the greatest TV shows of all time, but I'm just not satisfied because, you know, when you're a TV director, I had a lot more latitude than most TV directors do because they knew me as a writer and all that. So, but still, it's not yours, you know. And I get this call out of the blue and my agents go, hey, that wedding movie is alive. And I'm like, oh, really? I thought it was dead. And they go, yeah, there's another director on it, but he just quit. It's like, okay, well, I guess I'm not in anymore. So, and then he said, well, we should put you up for that. I said, like, look, don't call Judd because he didn't give it to me the first time. So clearly maybe he's moved on. I said, just put my name on a list and send it. And if 5 minutes later, he calls me, all right, Feig, we're going to do this. You know, it was Judd. And he said, just go meet with Kristen, make sure she's okay with it. And it was the day after Saturday Night Live, and we met her for coffee. And she was like, yeah, I'd love to. You know, and it was that. And then suddenly it was on.
Now, yeah. Just a little quick context. So Kristen co-wrote it with Annie Mumolo, who was basically the character who Kristen was playing, which is why Kristen's character was called Annie, right?
Exactly.
You have a $32 million budget here, which is, I think, quite a bit more than you'd had up to that point.
Yeah.
You also cast, I guess, out of an audition, somebody who would then play a big part in your life. Where did Melissa McCarthy come from as far as the character that you ended up casting her as?
Yeah, well, that was, you know, we again, just like Freaks and Geeks, we threw the door open wide and we saw everybody for this movie, everybody. And so many funny women, so many. But it was like we were trying to get archetypes of each character, you know, to play, you know, the new married, the grizzled old married, the single, you know, all those things. And we kind of found a lot of people for the other roles, but it was the Megan role. We were just like, yeah, they're good, but they're not quite right. And it was right at the end of the process when Kristen and Annie go, well, you should bring in our friend Melissa. You know, she's at the Groundlings. People always line up around the block when she performs. I'm like, great, why didn't we see her before? Because I'd never seen Melissa. I'd never auditioned her. She was just always working when I was casting and vice versa. And she came in and did this audition that was so out there that it took me 15 seconds to realize it was funny. Because it was just so, you know, everybody else had kind of played Megan kind of ditzy and all this, and she comes in with this energy, you know, like, we get these men and we're just gonna eat them up and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, wow, this is really funny and weird. And then I would always do like an improv section, and so I was like, but I thought she was playing the character as gay, and I thought, oh, this is really cool. What a cool way to do it. So then for the improv, I said, like, well, let's do a scene where you're trying to get Kristen's character to go out with you. Okay, so then she goes on to think about like, yeah, we're gonna go out, we're gonna find these guys, we're gonna eat them alive. And I was like, wait, what is this character? And we're just laughing hysterically. And she leaves, and she'll tell the story. She just beating herself up in the car the whole way home. She goes, why did I go so crazy with it? I said all this stupid stuff. At one point, there was when she falls off part of it's in the movie. She falls off the cruise ship. But in her audition, she actually had sex with the dolphin under the water. And I mean, it was bananas. And we were all just high-fiving, and they're going, we got our Megan. And, you know, there we had it.
And really, she's been probably the closest thing to a muse for you. I mean, we're going to get there in a second of just how many movies since then you guys have worked on together. But just because I've had on this podcast Melissa, Kristen, about a month ago, Maya Rudolph. We need to get it now from the director. Let's talk about the food poisoning scene, because that will be played till the end of time. It's going to be funny 100 years from now.
Yeah.
How did it come together?
It was when we were doing rewrites on the script with Annie, and Kristen was in New York, but we had some other people we were working with too, just brainstorming and all this. Annie and Kristen had written a very funny sequence where Annie, where Kristen's character doesn't have any monies, but they go to this fancy place. She puts on this really expensive dress. She has this fantasy about what her life could be like. And it's really funny, like a romance novel. She's running through the woods, and Matt Damon's there. He's like, run into my muscles and all this stuff. It was really funny. It was just kind of, but we were just going like I don't know, I think there's something more that can be had here. Because we love the idea of somebody with no money trying to pretend that they have money, trying to keep up with somebody who has money. And so as we were talking, what would be more fun is if Annie decides she's going to try to impress people by taking them to this fancy meal that she can afford. And it's this, the Brazilian place. But to her, it's really nice. And you see outside in the movie, it's really shitty. But for her, it's not. But what we loved is the idea of okay, you have to screw up so catastrophically in this movie to show how out of your league you are. And so if you take somebody somewhere that's so bad that they get food poisoning, what's not funny, the reason that scene is funny is not because they're shitting and throwing up all over the place. That's the end result. Why it's funny is because Kristen refuses to admit that something is going wrong. And so it's the comedy of, in the face of overwhelming evidence, you are going to stick to your guns and say everything is fine. It wasn't the restaurant, I swear to God. And then it just became, that's where, and then we just went for it,
And something like that was scripted to a T, or you encourage improv within boundaries, or how does that work?
I mean, it was definitely scripted, but then played within it.
Yeah.
And, Kristen was very nervous about it, and rightly so. I mean, because look, I'm a guy, Judd's a guy. Here are these two guys all right, here we're going to do it. You have you guys shitting and throwing up all over. But, it could have been terrible. Right. It really could have been terrible. I mean, even the night before, she was like, should we do that scene? I was like, Kristen, I swear, we're going to go for it, but we will not put anything in the movie that is not funny. I swear it, I swear it, I swear it. And we shot some pretty outrageous stuff, too. I mean, there's a whole sequence I knew immediately the minute we shot it that we wasn't going to go in the movie, which is basically when Becca comes in, and throws up on Wendy's head. She still has to throw up again, and so gets the idea that there's another bathroom down the hall, runs out down this all-white hallway with Whitney chasing after her, going that's not a bathroom, that's not a bathroom. And she throws open the door, and the projectile vomits across the room. And the vomit hits Whitney's wedding picture in this all-white office. And I was just like, okay, we're shooting this, but we're never going to put this in the movie. It's just too much. But we had all that stuff, and what we knew is we do a lot of test screenings, and we let's do an outrageous version, let's do a not outrageous version, let's temper it. And it took about 9 screenings to kind of get the math right, where we could push just far enough but not too much.
And also, I think something you've said you learned from Arrested Development, they did a lot of things very right, but one of the things that sometimes they maybe didn't do that would have served them well would have been to leave a beat for laughter, right? Because otherwise you miss stuff.
Yeah, well, what happened on that show was Mitch, he wrote these scripts were so dense with comedy, and he didn't want to lose any of it, and rightfully so. I mean, the thing is now, actually, that it works at a very modern pace now, but for back then, people were used to a laugh track, and something funny happens, you go, hey, that was funny. In that show, you turn, hey, that was funny. You missed 3 more jokes and 2 more setups. You gotta, that's something I've learned over the years. And honestly, I learned it when I was a stand-up. There's a pace, and you gotta let people breathe. You gotta have a moment where you can let them down, pull them up. Comedy can't be up here the whole time. You wear out the audience.
So, opening weekend, you had a lot personally riding on this. Again, this is maybe your last chance to be a film director. If it didn't work, that might have been 3 strikes.
I always call it Strike 3 was the name of this movie. Yeah.
But also, in a weird way, the stakes were even higher because there were people across the industry who were waiting to decide whether or not they would make a movie centered on actresses. And if this one didn't work, that may very well not have happened to the extent that it has, which still could have been better, but it a lot was riding on it. Did you feel that?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I had so many female writer friends who were inspired that we were doing this, who were then going out and pitching their female-led comedies, and every one of them was told, we have to wait and see how Bridesmaids does. And it was just like, are you kidding me? You know, like, when, you know, The Hangover was coming out. It wasn't like, well, we got to wait and see if this movie with guys in it is going to, you know, work. And I was just like, and I was actually really mad at the business at that point, because it's kind of like, please, A, don't put that on me. Yeah. And don't put that on this group of women. You know, like, maybe it might not work. We don't know. It's comedy. Comedy works sometimes. It doesn't. Fortunately, it worked. But you know, I mean, God, thank
And how
God.
did you? What was that weekend like for you? Do you kind of track the numbers coming in, or how did you?
Well, they have this, you know, what call in the business tracking, which everybody here knows showbiz. You know, and the tracking was not going well, and we've been told by Universal, if we didn't make at least $20 million on our opening weekend, we will be considered a failure. And we were tracking at 13 million. And all week, I'm just like, oh my God, tense. But it's looking like, maybe not, maybe not. They decided they were going to do on Thursday night a midnight screening, back when they would do midnight screenings at midnight. And I was like, don't do a midnight screening, because it's a wedding movie. Nobody's going to show up at midnight for a wedding movie. So of course they do it, and it doesn't do well. So I get the call that next morning, you know, and they're like 13 million. And I'm just like despondent. I'm like, well, that's strike three. I guess, you know, I'll be directing TV, which is fine. But at the same time, I'm not going to get to do what I want to do. And it was really kind of the late afternoon when I'm walking around in a daze. Phone rings. It's like, well, it's looking more like 15 million. You know, still under, but 15. Okay. And then like, well, maybe 17. So it's like, fuck. So then Melissa McCarthy and Ben Falcone, her husband, live in our neighborhood. And I was like, you guys just come over for dinner and we'll lick our wounds, you know? So we're sitting there having dinner, and then suddenly like a text comes in, well, that's looking like 19 million. And then the text comes in, well, actually it's looking like 20 million. And then it was like 21, 22, 23. And I was like, get in the car. Yeah. And we got in the car, we drove down to the Arc Lights and ran into this theater that was packed and rocking. And it was like, oh, thank God. And it was the greatest feeling in the world. I'll never forget that.
And we'll just note, in the end, $288 million worldwide, more than 40% from outside of the United States. So much for comedies with actresses don't travel.
Exactly.
And then the kind of cherry on the cake, 2 Oscar nominations,
exactly.
which comedies don't get. Melissa McCarthy, Best Supporting Actress, and Best Original Screenplay.
Yeah, exactly. For a movie with somebody that shits in the sink. There
That's
you go,
right.
huh?
Really,
Take that, Academy.
The Academy's really changing. It's great, yeah. Okay, so we have just a few more minutes, so forgive me for rushing through these many other fun things that you've been part of. But just to know, how do you follow that when you've got that kind of a really an unprecedented hit of the sort that it was? There's The Heat, which was 2013, buddy cop comedy, Sandra Bullock and Melissa McCarthy again, guys back together. And just, I guess for these, if there's just something that, I'm going to list a few of these, just the first thing that stands out to you in your memory about that. I know that one, Melissa almost couldn't even be part of it.
Yeah, no, it was, she was doing Identity Thief and had a 5-week window before she had to go back to Mike and Molly. I had gotten the script about 8 weeks before we went into production. So, and I was like, I have to have Melissa in this, because it wasn't written for Melissa. Sandra wanted to do it, and it was written for somebody else for the other role. And I was reading it, and I was just like, wait a minute, this is Melissa. And so, tried to work out the deal. And I remember I would call it our Dead Man Walking Scout, because we were out literally in Boston scouting and getting locations, and I was waiting for the call, either hearing we're gonna go or not go. And I thought, and I got so many calls, it's going to fall apart, and then it didn't. We got to do it. But Melissa had to, the last 2 weeks of production, film with us, get on a private plane, fly back, do Mike and Molly, fly back, and she actually ended the very last scene. We almost had to carry her off the set. She was so exhausted.
Wow. So Bridesmaids 2011, The Heat 2013, 2015, back with Melissa on Spy. Mm-hmm. She's an underappreciated CIA analyst who ends up basically morphing into James Bond. And I think it's kind of interesting here that, it can't be a coincidence that you're exploring so many different genres. Is that something that, hey, if I get the chance to make movies that I want to make, I want to experiment? Is that what it is?
That's my goal. My favorite director is Howard Hawks.
Yeah.
And he, gangster movie to Western to screwball comedy. Yeah. I'm like, I want to do that. And I think it also came from being a TV director, because I'd be on Nurse Jackie one week and I'd be on something, and it was so much fun to do different genres and bring my voice to those genres, and especially now I'm working with women. It's really been fun to put women into normally male-led movies.
Totally, and that one I think was your biggest budget up to that point, $65 million.
Yeah.
Shooting on location for months in Budapest. Yeah. The stakes are, in some ways higher, and yet again, these are each hit after hit after hit. We'll go next to one that I think there are more probably conflicted, complex emotions about, which is your 2016 reboot of Ghostbusters.
There you go.
Back with Melissa.
Hey.
Back with Melissa, back with Kristen, also Kate McKinnon and Leslie Jones, directing from a script that you co-wrote. And I wonder, sometimes if a movie came out a year earlier or a year later, things could have been totally different. But yet, this is coming out in the midst of, the rollout was leading up to our election. There were some weird things going on in the country, certainly on social media, everything. What was it like for you to just kind of live through the weirdness of the response to that movie before people had even seen it?
It was awful. It was really, I wasn't used to it because I'd had a really friendly relationship with the internet up till then, because Freaks and Geeks and Bridesmaids, all that stuff. So Twitter was this wonderland of like, hey, I'm having dinner. I'm just going to go on and talk. And we're going to talk and, have all this stuff. And then the minute I announced it, the world exploded. It wasn't even the day. The day I announced it on Twitter, there was overwhelming joy. Just my inbox was flooded with all these people, so happy. And then I woke up the next morning and the world had gone off its axis, and suddenly just every hater in the world came after us. And it's just crazy. I mean, look, I'm very proud of the movie. Yeah. It's just so silly. I mean, look, they're hating me right now because I said that thing in the press the other day about how
them, whatever.
Just 'cause, I'm just stating a fact that one of the people that came out against the movie was Donald Trump, and he put up this big thing, and so it didn't help. But I don't know. It's just crazy to me because it's a movie about people chasing ghosts. I don't quite know why everybody got so upset.
People, who was it? Was it who on SNL said "Get a Life"?
That was that William Shatner.
William Shatner. Yeah, that's basically okay.
Bless them.
2018, A Simple Favor. Anna Kendrick and Blake Lively, another genre that you're kind of the whodunit in a way. 2019, Last Christmas, Emilia Clarke, and sort of, I think from kind of your friendship with Emma Thompson birthed that one.
Yeah.
School for Good and Evil, 2022, Charlize Theron.
Thank you.
And the thing with that one, I think you've said was kind of cool for you was getting to this is the first time you invent a world for a movie, right?
Yeah, I had such a fun time doing that. I mean, we had built everything from the ground up. I made giant sets in Belfast. Yeah, it was a blast. But it was during COVID, so that was really interesting.
Complicated.
Directing in a mask is not fun.
No. Earlier this year, we had Jackpot, your most recent one, on Amazon with Awkwafina and John Cena.
Yeah.
And I guess, as the clock runs out on us, I just want to ask, we've in an hour gone through kind of the amazing ups and downs and pleasant parts and unpleasant parts of a long career now. What are you proudest of, and what do you hope still? Is there something specific that you're still seeking to do, or just keep it going?
There's so many things I want to do, so many genres I want to do. I'm dying to do a musical. Just really want to do a musical.
Oh, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I would love to do a Western, love to do a sci-fi, adventure. The main thing I want to do is tell great stories with great three-dimensional female lead characters. That's kind of all I really care about. I just love it. It's too much fun, and there's too many talented women out there to work with, and so I'm never going to stop.
And all coming out of FECO in great City of Burbank, California.
Yes, exactly. The FECO team, right there.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for all the great entertainment.
Hey, I got to do a shout out to Brent White,
Please.
my amazing editor, who has done all my movies, and all the way from Freaks and Geeks.
Awesome.
Right
awesome.
there.
If you've seen a movie you loved, it's because he also did most of Adam McKay's movies. And
That's
he's
fantastic.
amazing, so.
Well, congratulations on this honor tonight, and thank you so much for doing this, Paul.
Thanks,
really
Scott.
appreciate
Thanks,
it.
everybody. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, my friend.
Appreciate it. Love you guys. Thank you.